Before I say a single word, I want to share what I believe is the single biggest lesson around leadership just generally, which is we always have to remember and honor those whose shoulders we stand on. And for me today, I have the incredible honor, the incredible privilege of being in a building like this, doing work that I love, that I care about, that I'm passionate about, because of the gentleman who just introduced me. I think this is a critical piece of our journey. And I just want to say that my relationship with Emilio, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I do and why I do it and how I got here. But if for not Emilio and his mentorship of me, I would not be where I am. And that is the story of countless Latino students who LMSA and all its chapters have influenced. That is the legacy that Emilio has brought to our community. It is incredible that he's being celebrated today. So I can't see you all, but if you could join me just in a round of applause from my heart as a thanks to him and for all he's done, I would greatly appreciate it. So Emilio, thank you so much for your leadership and for your mentorship and for everything you've done for me. We need to begin there. So it's, again, I'm so thankful to be here. I wanted to break my comments perhaps into a couple of different pieces. First, I do believe it's important for everyone to understand kind of what I do, why I do it, and a bit about my journey. I then want to pivot to thinking about and spelling out for you a bit about the kind of landscape of hospital leadership. So what is hospital leadership? How is it organized? I think for me as a learner, it's always very important to be able to visually see, okay, what are the different pieces of this puzzle? How do I fit in? What are the spheres of influence? That took a lot of years. That learning for me was accelerated, fortunately, because of Emilio when I met him in 1995, who basically mentored me and taught me so much just about everything related to healthcare, but certainly an incredible amount about hospitals, around health plans. And I then want to shift a bit to talk about what are some of the unique challenges a person like me, a Latino like me, faces in an environment where we know there is nowhere near the diversity that there should be in hospital leadership, in boardrooms, and the list goes on and on and on. I'm hopeful, though. I'm optimistic. I think we've made a lot of progress. And I'd like to end with some examples of kind of the things that we can do to elevate ourselves as leaders in any area that we care about, and certainly as it relates to hospitals. I do want to engage in a conversation with Emilio about this because it would be doing all of us a disservice to not hear his perspectives about hospital leadership as he blazed the path for me and for so many. So quickly, I'll say that I've been at Mass General now since 2001. Since that time, I play a couple of roles. First, I'm still a practicing primary care internist. I spend one morning and one afternoon a week seeing patients. This is something I could never give up. I spent my life training to be a clinician. 70% of my day is speaking to patients whose native language is Spanish from a whole bunch of different countries in Latin America. It is my life joy. It is, especially in a leadership position where change could be slow, to be able to impact the individual when I'm able to see patients is incredibly meaningful to me and something I'll never give up. At Mass General, when I arrived, my primary interest was in minority research, health policy and health services research and disparities at that point, a nascent term. And so I was at the Institute of Health Policy here doing research under the mentorship of somebody who now leads the Commonwealth Fund, Dr. David Blumenthal. And I played a role in our Center for Diversity and Inclusion. Not unlike many institutions, Mass General in the late 90s had established a Center for Diversity and Inclusion led by Dr. Wynn Williams, another very, very prominent Latino leader you should all know about, Dr. Ernesto Gonzalez, one of the kind of key leaders in that office when I arrived. And our goal was to, and continues to be, to increase diversity among physicians and scientists and the health professions. And that's expanded now, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Since that time in 2005, I was able to found a place called the Disparity Solution Center. I'd say that this grew out of my impatience with all the research that was happening in the area of disparities, but the lack of solutions, the lack of kind of applied operational strategies and tactics to to better identify and address disparities within hospitals and within health plans. And so our center aimed to lead that charge, to provide guidance to hospitals and health plans across the country, to lead our work here at Mass General. And I'm pleased to say that we created something called the Disparities Leadership Program in 2005. Emilio is an associate faculty of the DSC, and we have worked with now about 250 hospitals in about 35 states, about 50 health plans. So our goal was just do something, make a move. We need everybody to take a step forward, and the Disparity Solution Center was learning, sharing, and trying to kind of till the field and advance that work. I'll end by saying that that work was incredibly fulfilling to me. I had a chance to do work nationally, as I mentioned, learn a lot from a lot of different places, meet a lot of different leaders. And in 2017, Mass General undertook an effort, strategic planning process to really consolidate and think about how we can magnify what we were doing in the area of disparities and equity and inclusion. And a new position was named at that point, 2019 Vice President, Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, which I assumed and allowed me to turn more inward to be more formally engaged in hospital leadership as my full-time job. Now, previously I had worked a lot with hospital leaders, but now I had a formal perch upon which I could bring my leadership skills to bear on our systems, policies, practices, processes, and that was exciting. That journey only lasted about 6 months before the pandemic hit, and I was asked to lead, as Emilio mentioned, Mass General Brigham's effort, equity and community health effort against COVID. And I've done that up until recently, as many places around the country have had a chance to sunset that work. In the interim, our Vice President for Community Health retired, and so we consolidated equity and community health here at Mass General under my leadership and elevated my position to Senior Vice President, where I report to the President of the hospital, Dr. David Brown. Now, I'll say a couple of things. Under my purview right now, I oversee several assets in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and community health. It is about a $28 million budget a year. It is about a 150 member team, a leadership team, probably of about 30 people who I oversee. Our primary assets are our Center for Diversity and Inclusion, which focuses on diversity and inclusion with the focus on advancing physicians, scientists, nurses, all in the healthcare workforce with a real focus on diversity, as well as subject matter expertise around disability, LGBTQ, and an entire inclusion effort. And that effort is led by Elena Olson, who you may know, and I mentioned Dr. Wynn Williams and Dr. Ernesto Gonzalez, who are really essential there. Next, we have an asset that I created, the Disparity Solution Center, that really works on our equity and quality of care in the house. We have been monitoring the performance of our care processes since 2007, stratifying them by race, ethnicity, identifying disparities, addressing them. The Disparity Solution Center is now fully focused on that, with a large internal footprint, quality of care inside the house, focused on disparities. The next key asset is our Center for Community Health Improvement, where we engage our communities built on our community health needs assessments, working with our community health centers, really with what I call a doorstep to bedside and back to doorstep approach to equity and community health. And that center really engages in a series of efforts, including a major pipeline program, community health worker effort, as well as community engagement with community coalitions in predominantly Latino cities like Chelsea, Revere, and strong partnerships in East Boston. So that is what I do. That is how I'm positioned in the organization. And I would say that this is the honor and privilege of my life, to be able to do work that I love, that I care about, and for it to be my job. I don't have to come to work. I get the privilege to come to work. I'd say has been a blessing. Now, maybe one quick thing before we turn it into a conversation. I do not come from a family of physicians. My dad did not graduate high school. My mom went to a couple classes in college. They were young parents. They were the typical kind of story of Latino struggles. My abuelos came to New York City in the late 1950s. Abuela working in a sweatshop, abuela working in a bodega, my other abuela cleaning rooms in hotels at the YMCA. It is important, I think, as we continue to hear our journey, the kind of critical driving force of the love that we receive, the sacrifices that people make for us, the paths that people carve for us, and how you could take individuals who are incredibly passionate about committing to making a difference in their communities, not knowing how, but wanting to do it deep in their heart, and set them on a path that I was fortunate to be, where by the grace of God, by the seat of my pants, by having mentors like Emilio, we're able to kind of begin to learn what is out there, identify what my strengths were, and begin to think about how I might organize my life and my career in a way that was fulfilling, and that, quite frankly, honored all the sacrifices of all those before me, who gave so much and cared so much about our communities, and allowed me to not just care for the patients who I care for, but communities, the nation, us as a student body who cares. And this journey continues. And so what we know about hospital leadership, I'm happy to share, happy to orient there. But I'll say that, efforts that I was able to be a part of, that many people led, working at New Jersey Medical School, getting a chance to go to Cornell and do my internal medicine residency and connect with Emilio and have him guide me, doing the Kamala Fund Fellowship in Minority Health Policy, were all transformational and pivotal moments in my development. And I would say that for you, the biggest benefit you have is access to people like us, like we never had it. The internet and the web and our ability to connect with people now allows you to get information at the tip of your fingertips. And I think that really allows you to do things that, quite frankly, took us a long time to do. So, Emilio, I'm happy to go into some other points here and certainly talk more about roles within hospital leadership. And I think it's important to orient people to that, and certainly some unique challenges. But I'll turn it over to you in case you want to ask some questions or have any particular comments.
Thank you, Joe. That your journey is spelled out, and I think that's for everyone, inspiration and guidance that sí se puede, it can be done. I recall a story that fact that you told me years ago that stuck with me, which is that when you were starting out at the Mass General, again, you were like, a lone man in the desert. I mean, the Mass General, which I knew well, I trained there, was basically, ivory soap white. There was really no community efforts, but there was a president who really had a heart and an understanding and a belief in that things could be different. And I know that you spent a lot of time thinking, preparing in how can I move the needle in this hospital. And I believe you went before the board of directors of the hospital, and you made your presentation. You made your typically wonderful PowerPoint orator presentation, and in terms of the needs of the community and what could be done, what should be done. And the chairman of the board, he turned to you and said, "Well, Dr. Bencourt, that's all well and good, but don't we do the same for everyone? Here at the Mass General, we're very proud that we serve every patient the best, and everyone gets equal treatment." And you turn and you say, "Well, there's a difference between equal and equity. If you are starting down here and you don't have resources and you have tremendous needs, you have to give them more." And you connected with him. He understood that. And I think that was the beginning of your dialogue in moving things forward in the Mass General. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about how, kind of this David and Goliath. I mean, how do you engage with these powerful boards? How do you engage with powerful leadership? And how do you move them in the direction of building equity for Latinos in the community and in the hospital as patients?
Yeah, no, thank you, Emilio. That's a 21-year journey here, and I'd say a couple things. And A lot of this grew from your mentorship. A lot of this grew from the Commonwealth Fund Fellowship and Minority Health Policy that I did. So how would I want to describe myself as to where I was when I was in the shoes of many of our audience members, and all due respect to our faculty who've done incredible achievements around as well. I want to kind of take myself back there, because I think that's the origin story for how and why I was able to do that. So when I was a medical student, clearly for me, I came from a family who was committed to social justice. My dad was an organizer in the workplace around minority workers' rights. My mom was always committed to the community. And so that was part of my DNA. So I'd say that was one. I'd say in medical school, it became very, very clear to me that when I looked around, there weren't a lot of people like me who had my experience, spoke my language, and understood and appreciated culture the way I did. I'd say number three, during that experience, it became incredibly clear how valuable I was on the care team, quite simply because I could speak Spanish and I was able to connect to people. I'd say another kind of key experience that I had, which was a realization, which I think is important. I realized, I'm in a group of students, many of them who've had a lot of advantages, some who've had less. I'm somewhere in that spectrum. But at the end of the day, I have a set of cards I have to play, and I have to play them as best I can. And for me, like many of us, it was, I may not be the smartest in the room from the standpoint of having had, gone to prep schools or X or Y, Z, whatever it is, however we define those opportunities, which quite frankly, my kids have and I didn't have, right? So my kids are way more advantaged than I am. And that's part of our journey is we give them, we work to raise each generation up. But I would say that the key thing for me is I had in my heart that I could outwork anyone, that I would work harder, be a better student, learn more, be able to expand my mind. And it was with those set of driving forces that I said, I want to do more, but I don't know what that more is. And I began to craft a set of kind of opportunities, experiences, so I could learn what is, because I didn't understand, the healthcare world. You have hospitals, you have private industry and biotech. And within hospitals, you have for-profit, public, and non-for-profit. I mean, the complexity really was daunting early on, but for me, I had to understand, you have the health plan space, the payer space, jobs in government and public health. The spectrum was very broad, but I had to begin to learn what all these people in healthcare were doing and what was a good fit for me. And part of that journey was putting my hand in a lot of cookie jars and figuring out what, number one, learning about those cookie jars, and figuring out what kind of was engaging for me in those cookie jars. And I realized, for example, that although I started doing research, it's not something I wanted to do for my career. Or, I didn't want to do patient care 100% of the time. I needed that, but I wanted to have a bigger impact. I say this because it's through that humility, driven by passion and commitment, that I was able to have people help me understand the landscape and develop what I believe were a key set of skills that allowed me to have, quite frankly, the audacity to have that conversation with the board. Because for many of us, like most of our journey, a lot of this has seemed like an impossibility. And I think what I learned is that people can see and feel your passion. Channeling that passion in a strategic way can be very, very powerful. Studying what's important to those I want to change and putting it in a language they understand can allow me to secure that buy-in that I need to advance system change. And I was very lucky because I had people like Peter Slavin and others who, quite frankly, I was a kind of round peg in a square hole. I come to MGH, I have a lot of commitment. I had some grants in minority health policy and research, but I wasn't a traditional health services researcher. I wasn't a traditional just clinician. I did some work as a clinician educator. So they struggled. And part of what they said was, we're not sure how you're going to fit in, but they had the courage to give me a chance. And I knew that if given that chance, I could try to do my best to do great things. But the relationship piece, Emilio, of what you're talking about, the ability to be a dutiful student of how is the board influence our leaders? Who are the board members? Who are our leaders? What are ways in which I could connect equity, disparities, Latino health to their interests? How can I get them to believe I think a lot of my work early on was that relationship building and selling ideas, getting people to buy into the importance of work, not as something nice or something for those esas comunidades pobres, but really essential to who we want to be as a healthcare system. And it was those early conversations that gave me more runway, that gave me more kind of protected time to do everything I could with an incredible amount of partners. But those conversations, there's a series of them across my career where I look back now and, I was young, relatively speaking, in my early 30s. And I say, man, I can't believe I had the guts to do that. But I also respect the fact that I did it respectfully, that I did it in a way that they couldn't deny the knowledge that I was bringing, the passion that I was bringing, and the ideas that I had, and they were able to consider them. In a movement, you need the types of things that you did in your career, certainly, being a real squeaky wheel and activist and trying to kind of break down the system. And you need people who work quietly within the system, and you need people who work in the middle. I mean, you need all of those pieces. And I think a key piece of advice for people is kind of how do you find your place in there, and how do you pivot within those places as your career evolves still? Because I play all of those different roles at some time in my career, and even at times now in my leadership role. So yes, that really set the stage for a lot of the work that we've been able to do. It was a big leadership lesson. And hopefully I'm also sharing some leadership kind of pearls, at least for me, that have been very helpful in advancing my work.
That's very clear. And I think something that we can all learn from. You mentioned mentorship, and I'm very proud to have been and continue to be your mentor. Very important, and LMSA is really deep into mentorship. I mean, understanding that for us to advance as a community, as a group, as a population, we need mentorship. But we also need those things like fellowships. I mean, we need opportunities that are going to give us the skills and the knowledge and meet the people that are going to open doors for us. And I know you mentioned that in your introductory remarks. Fellowships are very important. I mean, how do we, Latinos, Latinas, LHS Plus, I mean, how do we basically make our way to hospital leadership? I mean, what are some of what do we have? I mean, you finish a residency in pediatrics or medicine or surgery, and yes, the clinical piece, but how do you go the next step? Is a master's in public health something that is a must have? Is an MBA? Is it a fellowship? What kind of fellowships? So what can you tell us about that in-between step that besides the mentorship and your own guts and will and intelligence that really makes it possible for you? Yeah,
no, I appreciate that. So I'd say a couple of key lessons. One, you have to learn the landscape. So when I talk about learning the landscape, I didn't really know that I'd end up here. I knew I wanted to have a big impact somewhere, somehow, but I didn't know I'd end up here. So step one for me was always putting the books first, because I always felt like, during medical school, during residency, I can engage in all volunteer activities, do all this stuff, but if I don't take care of my books, that gives me the clinical competence and I think the visibility of being somebody who is skilled in what they do. That to me was quintessential and needed to start there. But learning the landscape was a key part of kind of step two, which is beginning to identify different leaders out there, and particularly Latino leaders who are doing work informally now. So this is not in a formal program, to figure out what was their sphere of influence, what were they doing. And a lot of that was done informally. At that point it was using the phone, but today it could very easily be sending an email saying, I'd like to learn more about your journey and what you do. I think that was really critical because I began to get the landscape of opportunities and understanding. So, in a hospital, clearly, as I mentioned, we're talking about hospital leadership. There are for-profit hospitals that have investors and shareholders. They operate in a certain way. Majority of hospitals are not-for-profit. And then we have public hospitals that serve vulnerable populations, primarily supported through government funding. And those hospitals have boards of trustees that provide oversight. Then they have leadership teams. In our case, we have a president. We have about a dozen senior vice presidents for finance and communications and operations and human resources. And in my case, equity and community health. And then there's another layer there. I didn't, that's not taught in medical school. And so some of that I learned informally through speaking to people like you, Emilio, and learning from others. And I think that was really critical because I began to learn, the landscape and some of the key skills that might be needed to advance in that space. Now, I'd say the next, and I'd say one quick thing here. That is so easy to do today. Because number one, we're committed. Number two, we're easily accessible, and we're really easy to find, given our ability to communicate electronically. But I would just encourage everybody, be a thoughtful mentee. Now, anybody could reach out to me and say, Joe, I'd love to learn what you do and more about it. A real thoughtful mentee will go on the web and spend a half an hour and look at everything that I oversee, and not because I think it's special for you to know it, because the 30 minutes that we are going to spend will be way more valuable. I won't be telling you stuff that you could find on the web. I will be telling you things that are from behind the curtain that are way more critical. So when we're spending that time, being a prepared mentee is really important. And I spent a lot of time trying to do that, and I would encourage you all to do that. So then your question about fellowships and opportunities, I think exposure to different things is critical. Now, these could take the shape of shadowing, informal or informal, summer programs, internships, and these all exist for healthcare leadership. American College of Healthcare Executives, American Hospital Association, hospitals have these. And some, again, could be formal or informal shadowing, formal internships and programs, and then fellowships like the one I did, where after my residency, I committed 1 year as part of the Commonwealth Fund Fellowship in Minority Health Policy, where I got at the Harvard School of Public Health, a master's in public health, got leadership training on communications, and finance, and strategy in that 1 year, and then did a practicum. The degree question's an interesting one. There's master's in public health, master's in public policy, master's in health administration, master's in business administration. These are all very valuable degrees. Certainly, I think today, just to be blunt, I mean, in hospital leadership, the MBA is probably the one that is, I think, most potent of them all in terms of what we see in the predominance of hospital leadership. But I think there's a big philosophy, driving philosophy of mine has been, there's a lot of different paths you can take to get to where you want to go. So fellowships like that exist now. And I think it's just about being diligent and looking for those opportunities around to see what might be a good fit. Not being afraid to fail. And by fail, I don't mean like, oh, I did it and I failed at it. No, failure is learning that something is not right for you. That is just as important as learning something that tells you I love this. So that part of the journey, formally and informally, I think becomes really critical. And these opportunities like the fellowship I did, and throughout the years, a whole bunch of other programs I did, the Harvard Macy program for clinician educators, other programs I did, that commitment to constant growth, I think positions you to be a better leader. And you learn the key skills, I think, that are essential in my role: strategic vision, operation and execution, how to mobilize a team, how to inspire a vision, how to hold yourself and people accountable, how to serve as a voice for the work, how to serve as an advocate for the work, and really how to advance your institution in whatever lane you're choosing, mine being equity and community health.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I believe we have a question in the chat box.
Yep, I see the question here for junior and mid-career faculty who would like to lead greater cultural competency in hospital settings. What steps would you recommend for them to take? So, this is an interesting question, right? Because when I began my residency at Cornell, as I mentioned, I met Emilio and another colleague of ours, Alex Green. the three of us were kind of kindred spirits with this fundamental understanding that those around us, quite frankly, did not have the tools and skills they needed to care for diverse patient populations. And based on decades of Emilio's work, working with many leaders on whose shoulders he acknowledges all the time, people like Leon Eisenberg and Arthur Kleiman and others, we built a curriculum. And really, at those days, it was beg, borrow, plead for a little time here, a little time there, to get into the curriculum and really launch the first cross-cultural primary care patient-based approach curriculum. And I think for us, it was really important to publish on this. So we published a paper in 1999, Annals of Internal Medicine, that kind of staked out our approach. So I would say, and that was 20 some odd years ago. I'd say it's different now. I think that path is more well-worn, and there are great opportunities to bring this level of education, and especially after the last 2 years and our national reckoning on racism and everything that's transpired, the importance of addressing the needs of vulnerable communities. These curriculum aren't nice to do's, they are need to be's and need to haves if you are to be an effective clinician or effective leader. So for junior faculty, I would say, one, really consolidate your knowledge around this through learning from the peer-reviewed literature and borrowing and collaborating with others who do work in the space. Two, build an ad hoc team, a cross-cultural committee. That's what we did, who began to come and do work together. Three, engage with leadership about where in the curriculum we could engage some time to build this in. Think about evaluation, think about sustainability. There are fellowships out there. I mentioned the Harvard Macy Program for Clinician Educators that teach you more pedagogy of curriculum development that you could certainly engage in. But, I've been a big believer in this idea that we, these paths are not ever going to be well-worn. We're going to need to blaze some, and it's going to be through some bumps and bruises. And so it may not be a glide path right to, your role, clinician, educator, cultural competence. It's those sets of ingredients that I think positions you well to advance that curriculum through a combination of your own training and getting some formal training in this area and in curriculum development. But there's no shortage of resources, leaders, papers on this type of work that I think you could borrow from today that will position you very, very nicely to really kind of advance curriculum in this space. And the time is absolutely now. I guess I'd say, clearly a key challenge with curriculum is the optional versus mandatory. And I do believe we need to get that commitment that this is a required set of skills that we will be tested on and that is essential to our growth and development, not kind of a noon optional lecture. I'm a big believer in that. And that's been part of our journey.
Thank you, Joe. Community. We all draw tremendous passion and energy from our communities where we were born, where our parents were born, where we lived. And I know that you have been very engaged with the community in Boston, Cambridge, Chelsea, and many other towns and localities around Boston. How important is this connection with the community, and how has it guided you and helped you in your work? I can say for myself that the late Helen Rodriguez Trias, who was my mentor and co-founder of the BHO, subsequently LMSA, she was hospital leadership. I mean, she was, I believe, like the only that I knew hospital leader in our community. She was the chair of pediatrics at Lincoln Hospital. Lincoln Hospital is just legendary for all that it's done and it has not done for our people, many of them in the Bronx. And that first year was very, very tough at Harvard. And we did the BHO, and I said, Helen, I can't take it. This is too much. I need a break. And she said, no, Emilio, no. Come over, spend the summer with me in Lincoln Hospital. And that summer, working with Helen, with the community, fired me up. And so I know how important community is. And I know how important it is for you, Joe. I mean, what can you tell us about how you have kept community in the forefront of all your efforts?
Yeah, it's the lifeblood, Emilio. I mean, I think it was my driving force when I began. The way I scratched that itch was caring for patients from our communities, in my early years, and then I think for me in this last, couple of years and in this role, I mean, getting a role, like you had in community health to be able to do that was just so important. So why is it important? It's important for the simple fact that there's not many of us sitting in offices like this. We advocate for our communities, and I think that's really critical. And advocate is not just, talk about the importance of it. It is about budget, right? Your biggest kind of demonstration of your mission and your values is your budget. So I think that I just want to be, very clear-throated about that. But this is I've lived my career with an urgency of now of how every day I'm going to try to lift up our communities and thinking of all the different ways to do that. And in this role, certainly, I'm able to go into community, speak to kids, go into community, help with community engagement, and particularly in the last 2 years, go into community and serve as a trusted messenger around all things kind of COVID. That's been incredible. It is inspiring. It is our responsibility, and I believe that. It is something that's incredibly gratifying, and something that through the tough days of the bureaucracy of leadership that you face, or the challenges of the politics, that really kind of feeds your soul. And we are needed. People need to see us. They need to hear us. We need to help them. This is part of our journey and our commitment to ourselves as peers, to those whose on shoulders we stand on, and to those who I think are committed to doing this every day. And so community is essential. I mean, and I take every opportunity to be out of this office and in community, engaging people, learning, and it helps make me a better leader. It helps drive the policy and practices and strategies that I'm creating, because it needs to be community driven. As you know, I mean, we can't kind of machinate on the strategies here in these offices. It really, those solutions come from the community, in partnership with the community, empowering the community, but serving as a partner with the community. And I think that's been my fundamental philosophy. And I guess the last thing I'd say is community is not just out in the neighborhoods, right? During COVID, I've had a chance to talk about one of the most important experiences I've had in my career, which is in the first leading our equity and community health efforts in COVID. At Mass General, in the first couple of weeks of April of 2020, 40%, normally about 10 to 12%, 40% of our inpatients, and at this point, we were all COVID. With COVID, we're Latino. And I remember my role doing walk rounds, and we have an incredible interpreter service. We did 140,000 interpreter visits in 2019. So, we have live and telephonic video. So we do great. But it was clear that given COVID, the interpreter service was not able to keep up, and there was a lot of shortcuts, and there was a lot of quality care that was being sacrificed. And at that point, what I decided to do was really put a call out to my colleagues, all Latino native Spanish-speaking doctors, to create something called the Spanish Language Care Group. And the concept here, Emilio, was that all of us would serve on the surge teams, so that every encounter that a Latino patient had, they'd have a Latino doctor there, bringing clinical, cultural, and linguistic competence to that encounter. So we mobilized in early April 51 Latina doctors from 15 different disciplines, from 15 different Latin American countries, who worked for 6 weeks, 24/7, 7 during the day, 4 at night, when we really, hoped the PPE would work. But at the end of the day, we were going to make sure that we were there serving our community in the hospital. And we didn't know, we hoped that we wouldn't get sick. But just an example, Emilio, of how we define community inside and outside our walls, and doing everything it takes, and oftentimes putting ourselves at risk. It was something that was incredibly important, and the single proudest moment in my career, because we came together as a family of Latina leaders, committed to our community in ways that inspired us all, made patients incredibly happy, and made our surge teams realize, man, this diversity thing isn't just nice. What I'm witnessing here in these rooms with these doctors and these patients is incredible. This can't be replicated just with an interpreter. Of course, we need more Latina doctors. I'm seeing it. So I think it helped our efforts in so many ways. And so, community is defined in a lot of ways for me.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. We have a common question in the audience. You could introduce yourself and pose your comments.
Of course, I'm Iris Reyes. I'm a professor of clinical emergency medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. We've met many years ago. I guess my question is having risen through an ivory tower at Penn, just as if you've had at Harvard, I know that I could have easily been derailed by the many biases that I encountered along my career trajectory. And I think looking at those that are rising behind us, I think it's important to address what kinds of tools you use to overcome the implicit bias, the microaggressions, the outright racism that we've both, I'm sure, encountered as we've come through, and what kinds of pearls would you give to those that are following us so that they can overcome them?
Yeah, it's great to hear your voice, and thank you. And it's a very important question, and I'm going to give you a very personal answer. And this personal answer, I say it's personal because, you know, I can't say how generalizable it is, but I can just tell you my journey. Although I would encourage people to just sit with it for a second and to have a discernment around what I'm about to say. I, throughout my career, faced many circumstances where, you know, like we all have our stories, ranging from at college being told, I'm not sure you're the medical school material. I'm going to use that as an example. So I have two options when I hear that, right? One option is to say, you're right, feel morally injured, and just take a different path. Or the other, which is driven by, you know, the ethos of my abuela, which is, te vas pa'l carajo. I'm going to do this, you know, one way or another. And I say that because, and it's not because I'm trying to be arrogant or I think I'm any, I think one of the things that I'm proudest of is I was instilled with this sense that I will not let anyone own my emotional space, mind space, or derail me from my vision. And throughout my career, again, experienced a lot of these. And a lot of it was how you react to it, how I react to it. I have a choice. I could say, boy, that was a micro. I mean, I have a long list of them. We all do. And I believe in every single moment, we have a series of choices in front of us. How do we confront it? How do we manage it? But the choice I think we do not have is to let it derail us. We need to find inspiration in each other and, you know, say, I'm not going to let it affect me. Now, this is a very big conversation today, you know, microaggressions but I do believe, you know, this idea, and it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but having a tough skin is part of who we are. Being defiant is what defines us as a community. And so I view these things, I experience them, I reconcile them in different ways, you know, depending on what they are, you know, with the tools that I have, but I will not let them derail me in my journey. And I struggle, just to end here. We hear this concept of imposter syndrome a lot. And I think the part that troubles me about it, just to be truthful, is that, you know, in my journey, the imposters have been a lot of the other people around me who are in leadership positions who didn't have to go through half of what we've gone through. Those are the imposters. We are tried, true, and tested. We, you know, need to be driven by confidence, humility, but confidence. And that's a personal answer because some people may not feel that way. They may not have that with, you know, but I do believe that has functioned for me. It has been a way to protect myself, to shield myself, and to be very, very focused and still face those, you know, and manage those today.
Excellent. You know, I think we could go on all morning, all day with this discussion. There's so much substance and richness to it. We kind of begin to wrap up. We have one chat box comment here.
I guess before we go into this.
Yep, I see it. I could do them here, Emilio, if you maybe I'll just do a round robin here quickly. Leaders born or made, leaders come in all shapes, stripes, types. You could be a leader in a lot of different ways. I think leaders do not need to be more born. They are, I do think leaders can be made. Certainly some people have natural aptitudes. And if you fall in a leadership position that work to your natural aptitudes, you might be more effective in that leadership position. But we do not need to believe that because we don't have a set of characteristics that we can't be leaders. I think, they are absolutely made. And those who do it well, perhaps are born for that leadership position. There's a question here about specific challenges in community hospital space. Absolutely. I think they have been less resourced. In Emilio's role at New York City Health and Hospitals, largest public health system, struggling for resources, caring for the most vulnerable. Yes, we do need to advocate for policies and practices that fund those institutions well, that don't allow for, their kind of patients who have commercial insurance to be stripped away. We're trying to do a lot of that work and how we revisit how we contract our commitment to the uninsured, the underinsured. This is a decades-long journey, but we absolutely, especially for our communities, we need to stand up our public hospitals and our community hospitals very clearly. And so I think there was a couple of questions there, Emilio, about community hospitals, and certainly you've forgotten more about community hospitals than I know. So I'm sure you could tackle this offline with some of the folks there. Should Spanish be mandatory? It's an interesting question. I would say, a little bit of Spanish could be pretty dangerous, actually, when we're trying to think about the competence we need to really care for people well. And this has been a debate amongst us around, should we make Spanish mandatory? And I would say if we do, we need to teach, Spanish and assess people's Spanish so that we don't, throw people out there and say, yeah, I know a little Spanish, and clinically they're disabled in their ability to take a history and manage a patient. So maybe I'll stop there. I tried to take a couple of quick ones along the way. I really want to thank LMSA. I want to thank JP for leading an incredible organization, his organization, attention to detail. And certainly thank you, Emilio. This is incredible to be kind of have you as a moderator. It's a gift beyond belief. So I thank you all for your time. Hope this was helpful. Please don't hesitate to reach out if I could be of assistance. And I wish you a wonderful conference.
Muchas gracias, Joe.